When I was a kid, and dinosaurs roamed the earth, there was no internet. Well, I guess technically there was internet, but not the kind of internet we have today. So I had to rely primarily on my parents and later school to give me new information. I mean, books were available, but going to the library and checking out a book on every single little thing that you might encounter in your everyday existence is not quite as easy as, Googling it, especially if you're not allowed to go outside on your own. And my parents taught me pretty much nothing. They just expected me to somehow miraculously know things. So I'm gonna give you just a couple of examples of the things that I did as a child because no one had ever told me not to. As soon as I was tall enough to reach the microwave, my parents gave me the green light to use it, so that they would no longer have to cook for me and could just tell me to go make something myself or heat up leftovers. Great idea, but they never told me not to put metal in the microwave. And think about it, it's something you just know, right? Not to put metal in the microwave? Well, no, you don't. Not unless someone tells you first. So one night, when I was home alone and decided to heat up yesterday's leftovers, I put into a microwave, not a fork, not a spoon, but a whole fucking frying pan. It started to sparkle and burned a hole on the inside part of the microwave door, at which point I quickly turned it off. When my father returned home, he told me that I now owed him however much the microwave had cost. Now, I was never given pocket money and I wasn't paid for chores or anything, so I'm not entirely sure how precisely he expected me to pay him. Maybe he meant that it was payable when I reached 18. I don't know. The microwave was fine, by the way. It went on to work for another 10 years or something. Another great example is cutting a wire. Yes, I literally cut a live wire with a razor blade. I'm not entirely sure why. I still don't really know. I vaguely recall thinking, I wonder what would happen just before I did it. Because, well, I didn't know what would happen and no one had ever told me not to mess with wires. This is the kind of thing you really should tell your children not to do. This is the kind of thing that you should watch and make sure that your children don't do. But my parents didn't really pay much attention to me, so that happened. My entire hand was covered in a black crust. It wasn't even a burn or a blister, it's like the skin had hardened and changed color. I wasn't taken to a hospital or anything, so it's a good thing that it healed, but I guess it's just because I was really young. My father's first and only reaction, unsurprisingly, was to tell me that I now owed him money for the TV, because he thought that I'd ruined the TV. But the TV actually just went out because of the short circuit, and I had cut a wire to a wall lamp. The wall lamp was fine, by the way. It went on to work until its eventual replacement with a newer model. The wire didn't even have to be replaced. Because I hadn't cut it in half, I just cut through the plastic part and barely touched the metal. And you know how most kids are told not to play with fire? Well, I wasn't. This was all before school, by the way. Of course, eventually, I picked up things about electricity and flame, but when you're like 4 years old and you think fire is fascinating, but no one really told you what it actually does and how it works, and no one is really watching you, it's not that hard to pick up a twig, stick it in a flame, and then carry it to the nearest wooden fence. I don't remember if I was ever given a bill to pay for that one. It wasn't our fence, and I'm not sure if the neighbors even knew that I was the one who'd set fire to it. My parents weren't about to tell them. I do remember being given a lecture on how everyone hates me now, which is a great thing to say to a 4-year-old. The fence was fine, by the way. The fire had charred maybe a couple of square feet of it. It was really dramatic for a few seconds, but the actual damage was negligible. There's probably a lot more horrifying stuff that I just can't recall right now because I've been repressing my childhood memories for years. Not sure how I survived my childhood. I think it's just that after a while, I sort of learned to just not do things. Because every time something like that happened, it wasn't just the trauma of the actual incident, but I was also punished for having done something wrong, even though I hadn't been told not to do it, but was still somehow expected to know not to do it. So eventually I just became terrified of doing anything new. Besides, aside from just not teaching me things, my parents also forbade me from going places and doing things, which meant that I also couldn't learn or gain new experiences on my own. I think my parents just decided that instead of teaching me how to live life, they would keep me safe by just preventing me from living it. But that kind of tactic obviously isn't going to work indefinitely. Sooner or later, your child will have to live independently, at least to some extent. And if you don't teach them anything, and prevent them from gaining knowledge or experiences on their own, then eventually they will be released into the real world with no applicable skills. So, moral of the story, teach your kids stuff. Teach them the most basic shit, because they're not going to just miraculously know it. Well, thankfully, there's internet now, so it's not as dire, but your child might not think to Google what not to put in the microwave, and just presume that microwaving a fucking frying pan is safe. And it might not end as well for them as it did for me. So, teach them everything if you want them to stay alive and safe. Or if you're like my father, then do it so that your material possessions don't get destroyed. Because you probably won't be able to get your 7-year-old to foot the bill. Even though my parents didn't teach me much, they liked to tell me horror stories without much context or explanation, like how if you walk down a railroad track, it can suddenly change directions, and then you'll become trapped in the rails and have to gnaw off your own foot. Or if someone calls you on the phone and you answer it, they could find out information about you and you won't even realize it, but they'll know who you are and where you live, and then they'll come and rob us or kill us all while we sleep. Still not a fan of railroad tracks or phones.